Thank you all for having me here. It's been a pleasure to come and speak with all these wonderful people here who I'm sure have their own caregiving story. Mine began, as he said, at age 24. I ended up spending 8 years as a caregiver. I spent 3 years caring for my grandfather in his journey through Alzheimer's, and then an additional 5 years caring for my grandmother in her journey through heart disease. So I have two different caregiving stories, but today I'm going to talk primarily about my journey through Alzheimer's with my grandfather, which is the subject of my book. What I have here is a kind of combination between a talk and a book reading. I have a few adapted excerpts from my book, which I will share at certain times. And but make sure this thing works. And it does. Great. So, to begin with, we have all different journeys through caregiving. Some of you are probably dealing with loved ones with Alzheimer's or other illnesses. So I'm sharing with you my journey through Alzheimer's, not because your journey will be exactly like mine, or that it even ought to be exactly like mine, because we are all unique individuals with unique caregiving stories. But we can learn things from each other. We can be inspired and encouraged by hearing the story of someone else who's gone through the caregiving journey. So I'm sharing my journey with you so that you can know something more of the struggles and the joys, the hardships and the successes that come with being a caregiver. People wonder, when they hear about Alzheimer's, what is it like? This is how I describe Alzheimer's. Imagine that your mind is a house. Alzheimer's is a thief that comes in and starts stealing things out of your house. At first, it's little things, things you don't even notice. But as the days and weeks go by, eventually you do notice. But there are only little things missing, so you think, oh, maybe I mislaid it, maybe it's nothing important, and so you don't worry about it. But as the months continue to pass, eventually important things are missing, and now you're alarmed. What's happening to those things that you were storing in the house that is your mind? And as those months and years pass, soon whole rooms in the house that is your mind are empty, and now you're really scared. What is happening? Finally, someone tells you what's happening. Maybe it's a loved one, maybe it's your doctor, and they tell you there's a thief coming into your house, and that thief's name is Alzheimer's, and that thief is going to steal everything you have until you have nothing left, and there's nothing you can do about it. That is what Alzheimer's is like. I remember when my caregiving journey began like it was yesterday. It was actually September 24th, 2006. It was my brother Arlen's birthday. My brother had been living with Grandma and Grandpa for 4 years because he went to college where they lived, and so he could commute to college from them, living with them. Now it was September. His 4 years were over. He just finished college. He was beginning to work. But he was coming home that day to celebrate his birthday with us. And it's one of those beautiful autumn days where the sun is shining, the sky is just so blue, the wind blowing, those white clouds are running across the sky, and the leaves are blowing in the yard. It's a happy day, a day full of life and joy. And then the first thing when Arlen came home is he went and he found me, and he said, "Rundy, I found Grandma crying this week." And she said, "I can't do it anymore. I can't take care of Grandpa anymore. Tell Rundy that I need him now." So, that evening I packed my bags and I went to live with my grandparents, and I didn't know that it was going to be an 8-year journey before I came home. Now people hear that like, whoa. You are 24 years old. You're a grandson. How did you end up being the caregiver? Well, like most caregiving journeys, like most caregiving stories, it's a bit messy. See, Arlen had been living with Grandma and Grandpa for those 4 years of going to college, so every day he saw what was going on. But the rest of the family, we were by different measures ignorant or, see no evil, hear no evil, because I don't know how to deal with it. But Arlen saw, and in the spring of 2006, he came to me privately and he said, "Rundy, I don't know how much longer Grandma's going to be able to take care of Grandpa. I think after I graduate from college, I shouldn't go get a job, but I should stay home and help Grandma take care of Grandpa." And I told him, "No. If Grandma needs help, I'll help her. You go get a job." And I explained this to myself in two different ways. On the one hand, I said, well, I have a better personality for being a caregiver, so if someone should do it, it should be me, because I got the better personality for that kind of work. And then I also said, well, Arlen, he just spent 4 years going to college. Who knows how long Grandpa will need help? If it's 3 years later, he'll have a hard time getting a job. So since I was trying to be a writer, sitting at home, typing on the keyboard, I thought, I can type on a keyboard and take care of Grandpa, and that way nobody loses out. True confession, I didn't do all that writing I thought I was going to do as a caregiver, but that's how I explained it to myself. The other reason I gave to myself was it felt like the right thing for me to do. So I was going to do it no matter what. Now, the rest of the extended family didn't all agree exactly how sick Grandpa was. So if we had said, well, Grandpa's real sick now and Rundy needs to take care of him, there would have been a big family argument. So instead, Arlen and I came to Grandma privately and said, when you can't take care of Grandpa anymore by yourself, Rundy said he'll help you. Grandma didn't want to be a burden on anybody, though, so she said, oh, I won't need help for a long time, and then just a little bit of help at the very end. We didn't argue with her. We said, okay, when you need help, you let us know. And Arlen said to me privately, I think about a year. So in the fall, I knew the caregiving journey was coming, but I thought I had 6 months, not 24 hours. So that's how it all began. I had no training. I had no experience. I had read about Alzheimer's a little bit, so I knew how I was going to end up, but I was 24. I wasn't married. I'd never cared for anybody before. I was as green can be. I emphasize that because when people hear my incomplete story, there's a tendency to think, wow, Rundy is an expert. I could never do the things that Rundy did. But that's not true. I didn't have any special training, and if you have a sound mind and a sound heart, you too can learn to be exactly as good a caregiver as I was. We all can do it. So, every caregiving journey has an arc to it. It doesn't matter who you're caring for or what they're ill with. There's an arc from beginning to end. And in that journey through caregiving, we all experience good things, bad things, and ugly things. Yes, I am not going to sugarcoat it to you today. There is a struggle in caregiving. Is it worth it? Yes, I believe it's worth it, but we need to be honest that there are hard things we go through. So I have a few stories to share with you about my hard things, just to give you a flavor of what it's like. I think you can relate, some of you, to some of these things. With Grandpa in his Alzheimer's journey, the two ugliest things I had to face was his night problems and when he stopped eating. When I came to live with Grandma and Grandpa, I was been afraid that Grandpa wouldn't even recognize me anymore. But Grandma couldn't take care of Grandpa as long as she thought. So when I came, he actually still recognized me, knew me, and he knew why I was there. But Grandma and Grandpa were already sleeping in different bedrooms, so I shared a bedroom with Grandpa. And it was a small bedroom. So our beds were about this far apart. There was enough space to walk between the beds, but that was about it. So, if Grandpa had a bad night, Rundy had a bad night. Now, at first, because he's still fairly well when I first came there, it was okay. We went to bed, we woke up in the morning, peachy. Well, then a few weeks passed and things started getting a little worse. He got out of bed in the middle of the night, and sometimes he couldn't find the door to open it to go to the bathroom. No, not a big deal, right? Okay, I got up, opened the door for him, we were good. Well, then a few months passed and things started to get worse. Grandpa would wake up in the middle of the night and he wouldn't remember why he was awake. And so he would sit on the edge of his bed and he would monologue into the dark. He'd sit there and go, I wonder where I am. I wonder what I see. Is that the Northern Lights? Anybody there? Mom? Jean? Of course, I'd roll over in bed and say, what do you want? And I knew he needed to go to the bathroom. Sometimes he would make up something he needed. Sometimes I could remind him that he needed to go to the bathroom. So that wasn't so great. Sleeping is a little harder in that situation. Then the months continued to pass and things got worse. Grandpa would wake up in the middle of the night. He would sit on the edge of his bed and he couldn't remember why he was awake. And so he'd just sit there and he would shout into the dark, Mom, Jean, anybody? And I'd roll over and say, what do you want? And maybe sometimes I could remind him that he needed to go to the bathroom. But most of the time he didn't know what he wanted, he couldn't remember, and I couldn't prompt him to go to the bathroom. So that was pretty bad. And then things got even worse. He'd wake up in the middle of the night, and he would get off the bed and crawl around the room in the dark. He'd knock things off the top of his dresser. He'd pull his dresser drawers out. He'd take the blankets off the bed. He'd feel around under my bed. He'd feel around over my bed. And he'd talk, and he would shout. And I could not convince him what he needed to do or to go back to bed. I could put him to bed at 9 o'clock at night, and he would wake up at 11 o'clock, and he would be awake for the rest of the night. It was unbelievable. He was 80 years old, and he was partying like a college kid. Except he wasn't a college kid anymore, so by the time morning came around, he was in shambles. He couldn't remember how to eat, he couldn't remember how to drink, he couldn't remember how to walk, he couldn't remember how to dress himself, and I had not slept all night. It was rough. They tell you that sleep deprivation is a form of torture, and I can tell you it is. Physically, that was the hardest part of the journey for me. Good news is, eventually we moved out of that stage and Grandpa started sleeping again through the night. But when I was in the middle of that, I sometimes thought, I don't know how I'm going to make it. I don't know how I'm going to make it. Emotionally, the hardest part for me was when Grandpa stopped eating. With Alzheimer's, if someone survives to the fatal final stage of disease, they will stop eating for one of two reasons. Either A, they forget how to swallow. They've forgotten the most basic physical functions. Or B, they forget what hungry is and what food is. And that's what happened with Grandpa. He could still swallow, but what's hunger? What's food? Well, why are you shoving something in my face? Stop it. And that's where we started to go. Now, in my mind, I knew that was where Alzheimer's ended up. But that's when I learned you can know something in your mind and feel something different in your heart. Because I felt like a failure. When Grandpa wasn't eating and he was starting to waste away, it felt like I was losing. And so I might spend all morning trying to get him to eat a few mouthfuls of food, and then I'd have to give up and wheel him back to the couch, put him on the couch, and then I'd go lay down in my bed and stare at the ceiling and wonder how I was going to make it through. Emotionally, that was the hardest part of the journey for me. So those were the really hard parts of my struggle. And then there are those things that we all face in the caregiving journey that I call just the bad things. They're the everyday things, those frustrations that, they're not huge, but you gotta plow through them. As a caregiver, you probably have your own as well. Here are just two for me with Grandpa and his Alzheimer's. One was his daytime agitation, and the other was his bathroom issues. Not everyone with Alzheimer's, but many people who have Alzheimer's will have what's called sundowning. It gets to the afternoon, and the sun starts going down, and all of a sudden, they are agitated. Grandpa had this bad. In the morning, he could be wonderful. 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, all of a sudden, everything in the house was broke. The couch was broke. The towel in the bathroom was broke. Don't tell me how the towel can get broke, but the towel was broke. The dresser in the bedroom was broke. He would go upstairs and downstairs. He'd go all over the house asking for help fixing everything. It was not something he wanted to do. It was a compulsion that he had to do until he was so exhausted he couldn't stand up. I quickly learned that I couldn't fix things for him. I could only be with him through that every day. And I kind of learned to play a game of Marco Polo. He had to fix the house about the same time I needed to make supper. So he's over there in the living room saying, "Hey, Ma, the couch cushion ain't working right anymore." I'd be in the kitchen chopping vegetables, and I'd say, "It's okay, Grandpa, I'll fix it later." 2 minutes later, "Hey, Ma, the faucet's not working right in the bathroom." I'm stirring the soup on the stove. "It's okay, Grandpa, I'll take care of it." You couldn't fix it, but I was just with him through it. We'd yell back and forth. He knew I was there, and that's all I could give him. Now, you might come in the house and thought we were both crazy, but it was how I learned to cope with it. It was okay. Talking to each other doesn't hurt anybody. The other thing that was difficult was his bathroom issues. Now, I knew incontinence was part of Alzheimer's before I came, and I dreaded it because Grandpa was a very modest man, and you didn't get involved with his business. So I imagined World War III when things started going down that path. Now, fortunately, it wasn't as bad as I feared because I came before Grandpa had incontinence, and I learned how he did things. I learned how to finesse things before we were into the middle of it. So it wasn't fun. It can be a bit touchy, but I learned how to be quick, how to be discreet, and we managed. One of the great things about it was that there are solutions to this problem. If you have a mess on the floor, there's cleaning products. If you have a mess elsewhere, there's incontinent products. And so maybe 15 minutes of unpleasantness, but you could move on. The ugliest things in the caregiving journey are those things you can't fix. Incontinence, we can manage it. So those are kind of two examples of the everyday struggles I had to go through as a caregiver. Which brings us finally to good. Is there anything good in the caregiving journey? Yes. If you have eyes to see it, there can be profound good in the caregiving journey. I'll give, again, just two quick examples. My grandfather, when he was 10 years old, lost his father to suicide. And so he put a wall around himself to not let anybody close. Nobody could hurt him, and he wouldn't hurt anybody else. Nobody disappoint him, and he wouldn't disappoint anybody else. So he went through life not really having any close friends, not being terribly close to his children or his grandchildren. He kept himself apart. That wall was one of the first things Alzheimer's took away. He became more himself. He became more free when he had Alzheimer's. And I entered into the caregiving journey with him, and at first I cared for him as you would your little brother. I helped him get his shoes on. I helped him with his breakfast cereal. And as the journey progressed, maybe a year, 18 months into the journey, he started calling me by the name of his older brother. I became Gene. When Grandpa was little, his older brother Gene took care of him. His older brother Gene looked out for him. Gene was his favorite brother. And so we grew close like two brothers would be. And then as the journey progressed, I began to care for him like you'd care for your own child. I'd help him get dressed. I'd help him take a bath. I'd help him in the bathroom. I'd answer his questions and calm his fears. I'd tell him stories and sing him songs when I tucked him into bed at night. And when I looked at him laying in bed, I felt toward him as you'd feel toward your own child when you put him to bed at night. Of course, in my mind, I knew he was my grandpa. I never forgot that. But in my heart, I felt that closeness to him. And that was a great gift from that journey. The second thing that I gained was an understanding of what self-sacrificial love is, what it costs, and what it gains us. And for me, that is the greatest gift, the greatest unexpected gift I gained from the caregiving journey. And I will carry that with me for the rest of my life into every relationship that I have. That is a profound good that we can all gain and grow in through the caregiving journey. So, every caregiver is caring for someone who has a story. Whether it's Alzheimer's, Parkinson's disease, cancer, the person you're caring for has a story. And it's important for us to understand what they are going through. But we can never fully understand what the person is going through unless we have also suffered from that as well. In regards to Alzheimer's, I like to say, anybody here know what it's like to lose your mind? And probably any mother wants to raise her hand and say, yeah, I've had little kids, I know what it's like to lose my mind. But I don't mean lose your mind in that way. I mean, do you know what it's like to forget how to use a light switch? It seems like a pretty simple thing, right? Up, on, down, off, up, down. Or how about a faucet? You just turn it on, right? Well, we really started knowing something was wrong with Grandpa when he started forgetting how to use a light switch and a faucet. Or how about your shoes? Tying your shoes is one of the first things we teach a little child. What's it like to wake up one morning and realize you don't remember how to tie your shoes? Unless you are going through Alzheimer's, you cannot fully understand what it's like. You can read books about it, and that's good and important, and that teaches you something. And you can watch the person going through the disease, and that will teach you something, important things. But you can never fully enter into that experience unless you're going through it. When we look at somebody with Alzheimer's and say they're a stranger in a strange land because the world is becoming strange around them. But we need to recognize that we also are strangers in a strange land because as caregivers, we don't fully understand what they're going through. And that should teach us to be humble and to have respect for them, whether it's someone with Alzheimer's or cancer or Parkinson's or any other disease. So this is where I'm going to share with you a little adapted excerpt from my book, which is something good for us all to remember. Everybody knows Alzheimer's is about forgetting. That reality eclipses another important truth. With all that is lost, few understand that in Alzheimer's one can still learn. To be sure, the things remembered are dwarfed by the things forgotten, and the things learned do not measure up to what was once known. But the gains are still meaningful, and in the context of Alzheimer's ravages, perhaps all the more meaningful. It seems contradictory. Isn't forgetting the opposite of learning? We think they can't both have a part, and yet they can and they do. For the person with Alzheimer's, it's about learning how to live with the forgetting. How difficult the journey of Alzheimer's becomes depends in a large part on how well both the caregiver and the sick learn to deal with the forgetting. For the person with Alzheimer's, the learning how to deal with forgetting begins long before any outsider is aware of it. There are subtle habits, perhaps even unconscious at first, developed to cope with the first problems of forgetting. Then the disease grows worse, and it becomes obvious the person with Alzheimer's stops old activities or changes his daily routine because things he used to do, he can no longer remember how to do. It is easy for the observer to simply think that the person forgot and no longer remembered that they used to do the particular activity. But in my experience of caring for Grandpa, he forgot how to do something like use the bathroom long before he forgot that it needed to be done. The person who is not learning how to deal with their Alzheimer's will keep trying and always end up in frustrated failure. The person who is learning well will give activities up as they learn that they can't do it. But Grandpa didn't simply wake up one morning and forget how to live his life. It was a process of forgetting, but also a process of learning how to let go. Independence is a difficult thing to give up, and it should not be quickly taken from someone either. When facing Alzheimer's, the caregiver can become so fixated on the fact that the Alzheimer's victim is forgetting that they fail to help the person through the steps of learning how to deal with that forgetting. I tried to avoid that trap. My goal was to be with Grandpa wherever he was at in the process, not force the end result on him before he was ready. It is hard for a person to learn that they are forgetting everything. For Grandpa, sometimes the learning wasn't precisely acceptance, just resignation. The process wasn't always smooth for Grandpa and me. There were times and situations where he struggled long and hard, like with using the bathroom. That was important to him. Other times he accepted his losses with better grace. It is natural to imagine that all the things in life which are hard to learn, such as math, science, or playing a musical instrument, are the beautiful and great things. But I think harder than all these is learning and accepting the reality of forgetting. In its own way, navigating the process and accepting the disease of forgetting requires as much grace and skill as a concert musician. Grandpa took the battle on his terms with his own frailties and strengths. While helping him in that great struggle, I tried to recognize and cherish the small accomplishments. I tried to acknowledge the victories for what they were. They may have been unimportant things, but for me, the little victories were reminders that Grandpa still interacted with the world. What Alzheimer's takes and what it leaves is a mystery. As important as it is to care for those ravaged by the losses of Alzheimer's, it is equally important to recognize the things gained or held in spite of those losses. Respect is an important part of caring for people with Alzheimer's. But that is true for whatever disease you're facing. Needs. As caregivers, we're all addressing needs every day. With Alzheimer's, but also with any other disease, we need to recognize how great those needs are and recognize our limits in providing for those needs. With caring for someone with Alzheimer's, you can kind of trick yourself because it starts out the needs are pretty small. When I first came, Grandpa needed help tying his shoes and making his coffee and putting on his coat. Easy, right? By the end, I had to do everything for him. I had to feed him, I had to dress him, I had to bathe him, I had to toilet him, and I had to get him out of bed, I had to put him on the couch. I had to do everything. I was young. I was 24. I was there all the day. I could do that. But most people couldn't. If you're a wife of 80 years old, you probably don't have a good enough knees or a good enough back to do that level of care. If you're a daughter and have to provide for your family, you've got to work during the day. You can't be there 24 hours a day. As caregivers, we have to recognize how far we can go with physical care and where we need to ask for help in advance. Because if you wait to the moment of crisis, you'll be running around crazy, and you'll be so stressed trying to figure out how to make things work when it's the last minute. So I had to recognize the needs and decide whether I could meet them. And as caregivers, you need to do the same thing. But it's not just physical needs. The need for mental stimulation is also one we should recognize. And with Alzheimer's, I found it very important to provide Grandpa with pleasant mental stimulation. Early in the disease, it was something like his old healthy routine, kind of a shadow of it. He couldn't do all the things he used to do, but he liked to do something close to his old routine. As the disease progressed, he could do less and less things, but even at the very end, it was deeply important to him to have interaction. Whether it was him sitting and listening to me practice a guitar, or having me sing songs to him, or read him stories, mental stimulation is what kept him happy, kept him from being as depressed, and helped him deal with the struggles of Alzheimer's. And again, mental stimulation helps every person going through the disease, whether it's cancer or Parkinson's. Being mentally active and stimulated is a way to keep yourself enjoying life. Emotional support, emotional needs are also huge for anyone. For Grandpa, it was worries. He was a worrier even when he was healthy, and when Alzheimer's came on, it got worse. He would worry about things that were reasonable and irrational. He worried often for my grandmother because he knew that she was ill. He also worried about himself being abandoned because he knew it was hard to care for him. There were some mornings when he had a bad night, he'd get up and say, "You stay in bed. You're going to kill yourself with all this hard stuff." Of course, I had to get up because he needed me to make him a coffee, but it was a nice sentiment on his part. And sometimes when we had a bad day, he'd say, "Well, you know how things go. They get too bad, and pretty soon people want to get rid of me." And I would tell him, "No, Grandpa, I knew it was going to be like this, and I'm not going to get rid of you just because you're having problems." But he also had irrational fears. They would be many, day after day, but a reoccurring was that the pipes would freeze. It didn't matter if it was middle of July. If he stuck his hand in the cold water and felt a little too cold, the pipes were going to freeze. Now, I answered his worries by making sure he knew that I heard him, and I was doing everything I could to calm his fears, whether they are rational ones that had real solutions or irrational ones that we opened the doors under the sink just to make the pipes not freeze. Didn't matter, wasn't really a concern. So whether you're dealing with somebody who has fears or is dealing with anger or frustration or depression, being with them through their emotional journey is huge. Finally, there's the issue of spiritual distress. Not everybody is going to deal with that, but my grandfather did. And it's hard for us as caregivers because they raise difficult questions. Questions like, why did God let this happen to me? Why am I going through this? What did I do wrong? And we don't have easy answers, and it makes us uncomfortable, and there's a temptation to want to sweep it under the rug. To say, "Oh, everything's okay. Oh, there's not a problem. It's all right." But that's not helping them deal with these hard issues. If they want to talk with their pastor or the priest or the rabbi, whoever they consider a spiritual authority, don't say, "Oh, don't bother the pastor, Bob. It's not a big issue." No, for them it is. And if you get the pastor to come in and talk to them, or if you can just sit there yourself and listen, sometimes that's the best thing you can do to help them through something which is hard for them. Now, not everybody deals with that particular struggle, but if you do have somebody, don't try to avoid it because it's not how you help them best. So, caregivers, what I like to say is remember the 5 L's of caregiving. As you're a caregiver, remember to look, to listen, to learn, ultimately to let go, and above all else, to love. It doesn't matter whether you've been married to your spouse for 50 years. When they become ill, whether it's Alzheimer's or something else, the dynamic of the relationship will change. And you need to look and to listen to learn how things will be different. If you're coming in to care for mom or dad and you're a daughter or a son, you need not only to look and see what's going on today, but tomorrow and every day, because the situation will continue to evolve and to be dynamic. And don't just listen to mom or dad who's sick. Listen to the other spouse. Listen to whoever else is in the house, because they might be getting frustrated, depressed, or overwhelmed. So everybody needs to be heard. And if you look and you listen, make sure you actually learn. Because if it's all going in one ear and out the other, everybody's time is just being wasted. But if you look and you listen and you learn, you can be the best caregiver that person has. What do we all not like about those particular doctors? It's when a doctor comes in, they don't look and they don't listen. They just decree from on high and sweep out of the room, and you feel not cared for and not heard, right? So as the advocate for the person you're caring for, when you look and listen and learn, you can be the one to grab the doctor by the arm or perhaps by the throat and say, "You listen to me. You're not understanding what's going on," and then you can advocate. But if you look and you listen and you learn, you will become the greatest caregiver for that person. But then there's the whole letting go thing. Every caregiver eventually has to let go. Sometimes it's that glorious thing the person's got well. They survived their cancer, they're better, and you need to let them go back to their own independent life. But often as caregivers, we're caring for someone who has a fatal illness. And in the end, you must let go. With Alzheimer's, it can be a long goodbye, but there are certain moments when you realize you're letting something go that you will never get back. For me, ground zero was when Grandpa stopped eating, because I knew that this was goodbye if I could not win this battle. And there got to be a point where it was a process. It wasn't like all of a sudden one day Grandpa went from eating well to eating not at all. It was a journey from good to really bad. And at some point along the journey, there's this realization that either I can let him go or I can hold him down and pry his mouth open and start shoveling food in. And from back here, we can all recognize which is the right choice. But in the moment when you feel like you're failing and he's slipping away, you start grasping for things you wouldn't maybe have realized you'd grasp for. And I had to say, okay, I have to say goodbye. Even though he's not dying tomorrow, this is a goodbye, and I had to learn to do it. For you, it might be going for a walk, taking them to the movies, going out grocery shopping together. You've done it for a long time. It's part of life together. And now their sickness has come to the point where they can't do it anymore. And you find yourself gripping onto that. You have to let go, because if you hold on with a clenched fist, you will make both you and them miserable. But how do we let go? How do we do these things? It would be nice if we had a neat little book. But the answer is love. And there is not, unfortunately, a little booklet with the 10 easy steps for loving somebody. If there was, we'd all have it, right? But it's like with a baby. You bring a baby home from the hospital, and there's not a neat little book that tells you how to love that child. It is overflowing from in your own heart. And as you love that child, as it overflows from your heart, you learn what they need. You learn their personality, their quirks, who they are, and you learn how to provide what they need. And the same is true for caring for other people in our lives, whether they're 40, 60, or 80. Love will teach you how to listen, how to look, and how to learn. And ultimate love is what will show you, yes, now is the time to let go. So if you love the person you're caring for, that will enable you to be the best caregiver. And it's true for doctors and nurses as well. What are the best doctors and nurses? It's those who love their patients, not the ones who are the smartest and got the best grades. Taking care of you. Caregivers are really bad at taking care of themselves. Yes, this is confession time. It's hard to ask for help, because as a caregiver, you're pouring your heart and your soul into it, and asking for help sounds like, I give up. Asking for help sounds like, to ourselves, I don't care enough. It's not true. It's not true. It's what we tell ourselves as caregivers, but it's not true. We are not superhuman. We need help. And it's by asking for help that we make sure the persons we love get the best care possible. That was really hard for me. And trying to do everything, that's how we end up in the hospital, with emotional breakdown, a mental breakdown, a physical breakdown. So asking for help is not how we say that we're failing, it's how we be successful. So know your limits, admit your needs, and don't be afraid to ask for help. What we need in our lives is other people who support us. Whether it's your family or friends, neighbors, or an official support group, you need somebody to help you through your journey, because they'll be the ones who remind you that you have limits, who help you admit that you have needs, and encourage you to ask for help. It's by having people with us that we make this journey successful through as a caregiver. For me, my immediate family was my help. For you, your immediate family might be your problem, and you need someone else to support you. But whoever it is, we cannot make this journey alone. And if you are someone who's supporting a caregiver, number one piece of advice, listen. There is such a good-hearted tendency to want to try to fix things for that caregiver. They come to you and they start pouring out their heart to you, and 4 minutes later you want to fix things. Resist, because they've been spending months, perhaps years doing this. And after 4 minutes of conversation, you're telling them how to make things better. You know what? You just became a bull in the china shop of their heart. And you're going to start smashing all the fine china they have in their heart. Because it sounds like they've been spending months doing something that you can fix in a few minutes, and it will hurt them unintentionally. So listen to the caregiver in your life. And after you've listened, don't judge. Nobody is a perfect caregiver. If you've been sitting in the peanut gallery watching me through my years as a caregiver, you could have told me how I could have done things better, and you would have been right. We're all trying our best, and what we need to hear is not how we're not doing good enough, but how people understand how hard it is for us. So listen. Don't be at backseat drive, and encourage. Do you know what I hear from caregivers? What caregivers tell me is, nobody knows what I'm going through. Nobody understands. Nobody cares. So what you can do with a caregiver in your life is say, I see how hard it is for you. I care. What you're doing is important. Thank you. And if you listen and you encourage, you may have just done the most important thing for that caregiver that you could have done. So we're coming around to the end of our journey together. And this picture up here, I don't know how I can see it, but it looks like a really sad picture. At the end of my grandpa's caregiving journey, he couldn't walk anymore, but he still believed in keeping a neat house. So he'd get down off the couch, and he would crawl around on his hands and knees, picking up little bits of lint off the carpet. Sometimes it was real, sometimes it was imagined. And as he crawled around, he would call for people, real and imagined. It'd be a sing-song list of names. It'd be Jean, George, John, Jacob, Jenny. Just calling for somebody to come and find him in his lostness. And when he got tired, he'd lay down wherever he was on the floor and take a nap. And we can see this picture there and see a picture of a man and all that he's lost to Alzheimer's. But there's another way that we can see that picture. I'll get to that in just 1 minute. Caregiving is hard. Alzheimer's is a hard disease, and in the face of it, there are no easy answers. It is hard to be a caregiver for someone with Alzheimer's because there is never a getting better. If you take care of a child, they grow up and you see good from the care you gave. You see success. But Alzheimer's is always a long walk into the night, and that is hard. Alzheimer's drives its victims to their knees, figuratively and literally, as inch by inch, day by day, the battle is lost. At first, Grandpa staggered and stumbled as he tried to walk. Then he crawled aimlessly about on the floor unless I pushed him in the wheelchair or carried him, feeling so light in my arms. Before, he struggled to get to the bathroom in time and use the toilet properly. Now I changed his diapers. In the early days, he couldn't remember the last time he had taken a shower, and he struggled to shave himself. Then I bathed him and shaved him and dressed him. Before, I cut up his food so he could feed himself. Then that failed too. His hands would shake and jerk clumsily as he tried to bring the spoon to his mouth. He grabbed at imaginary implements and food that wasn't there and wondered why nothing reached his mouth. His mind wandered as he played with the folds in his clothes, the food in front of him forgotten. It was a battle to eat, and one he was slowly losing, but which he desperately wished to fight alone. The end is coming for everyone with Alzheimer's, slowly perhaps, but inexorably, as every little loss brings us one step closer to the final defeat. But perhaps the battle should not be considered as lost. Maybe it is better to say that the battle is won, day by day, as with love we help to the end. Help with the dignity and grace we can muster. If it is how we live that matters, then each day can be taken up daily in a victory of living out love, or given up daily in defeat. How we see things matters. And now I'll come back to this picture. When Grandpa had reached that stage in his disease where he was crawling around on the floor, the world had shrunk so small that he wasn't aware of anything around him. I could be in the same room and he wasn't aware that I was there. So we started playing a game. I don't recommend this. It was something very peculiar about me and Grandpa, but it was a game we could play together. And he was crawling around on the floor, and I was sitting there one day and thought, gee, he looks like a zebra out in the African plains getting some grass to eat. So on a whim, I got down on my hands and knees and started crawling around after him like a lion stalking his prey. And at the right moment, I pounced on him and pretended to devour him up. And he jumped out of his skin, and then he lay down on the floor there, and he started laughing and laughing. And he said, did you see how much I jumped? He said, boy, I jumped so bad, you got me so good. And then he'd say, I'm going to get you back. We would play that game all week. One day he was sitting on a couch and he was going through a magazine. He couldn't read anymore, but he was still flipping through it, looking at pictures like a little studious professor. And it struck me to get down on my belly, and I slithered around the couch until I was right by his knee. He didn't notice me at all. And I popped up and pretended to bite him on his knee. I went, chomp, and he jumped. And he started laughing and laughing. He said, do you see how high I jumped that time? He said, you better be glad I didn't have my mini club with me, or I would have spattered you across the wall. And then he said, I'm going to get you back. Well, one evening he was having a kind of bad time of it. He was yelling and yelling for people who weren't there, calling around the living room. I just let him do his thing. I couldn't fix anything. So I was working on my computer, and eventually got quiet, and I realized, you know what, it's getting late. Maybe he's ready to go to bed. So I got up and I walked back in the living room, and he was laying about like that. So I went over to him to shake his shoulder and wake him up. And as soon as I took hold of his shoulder, he rolled over suddenly and went, "Wah!" And I jumped out of my skin. And he started laughing. He said, you jumped. He said, I got you back. I got you back. How a man so lost in Alzheimer's that he could not remember how to walk or how to dress himself could lay there and scheme and remember that he was going to get me back. I cannot explain it to you, but I can tell you that I can look at this picture and see a reminder of all the love and good times we had in spite of Alzheimer's. how we see things matters. This last picture was taken 2 months before my grandfather died. It was our July family reunion. He passed in September. So the family came by to visit, and there's Grandpa laughing with my Uncle Frank. A stranger looking at this picture wouldn't think Grandpa was in a dire situation. They wouldn't guess how after the party was over, it was a battle with apathy and exhaustion to get him to eat a few mouthfuls. That picture doesn't show all the hard things, but it is a glimpse at what the hard things gained. There were many sad times and many hard times, but there were happy times too. Even though Grandpa was in the last weeks of his life and just about everything had fallen apart for him, when his children and grandchildren were around, he could still be happy, perhaps even very happy. In some small measure, that picture says what I had labored to give. Sometimes what dwells most fresh in my memories is the pain and the ugliness, and I can have a hard time getting past that. It hurt so bad at the end, and those memories cloud my thinking. This picture reminds me of something which is easy for me to forget, that I did give Grandpa something tangible, something real, even in the midst of his loss, and that is good to remember. Caregiving is hard. No person can reward you sufficient for what it costs you in time, emotions, and life. And that truth will either ruin you or make you more whole, more the person you were meant to be. If you are or ever become a caregiver, you will be better for it only if you follow the path of living for the giving. And with that heart and attitude of giving, you gain so much more, a richer understanding of what it means to love, to sacrifice, and to step beyond selfishness. If you go through the journey of caregiving with an open heart, you will come to learn that it is not just you giving to the person in your care, but they are also giving something to you. And that is where I would end. Thank you.